I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Where are our prophets now? Where are those messages God chooses to communicate divine revelation through? In the past, the Creator has sent prophets like Abraham, Siddhartha, Jesus, Muhammad, and many more. Maybe our higher power has switched tactics since we reinterpret God's words as soon as the Creator's prophets leave us. Could it be that Spirit talks to each one of us individually and we haven't learned to listen? On Words of the Prophets, our modern prophets show us how to find the internal prophet that is the I Am, and we discuss the application of spiritual principles in all aspects of our lives. Love and light, everybody. I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Today my guest is Viki Elkey. Viki is the Executive Director of the New Mexico Coalition to Repeal the Death Penalty. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Reverend.
So great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Today we have a prophetic topic. It is showering His mercy. And this topic can be found in the Sri Guru Granth Sahib, Section 7, Rag Gori. And the complete sentence reads as follows. Showering His mercy, He has cut away the noose of the messenger of death. Before we get started, Jenny, you're curious where that comes from. It's one of the basic books of the Sikh religion. So it's Sri Guru Granth Sahib. If you're interested, go look it up. It's got some fascinating stuff in it. So good to have you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation.
Before we get into the meat of this stuff, why don't we get you introduced to the audience? Give us your backstory. How did you get involved with the New Mexico Coalition to Repeal the Death Penalty? And
absolutely, what got me here?
Yeah.
I've been in New Mexico for about 15 years, and I started working with the coalition last summer in July of 2008. Before that, I had worked with animal issues in New Mexico. I worked to ban cockfighting and protect pit bulls and to spay-neuter critters and all that good stuff. And started working with the coalition last summer. And as I'm sure most of your viewers know, on March 18th of this year in 2009, Governor Richardson signed the bill making the death penalty part of our past and not part of our future.
Let's back up just for a second. I'm just curious. Was this something that you were familiar with when you got involved? And I mean, that you...
It was very interesting how I got involved. I absolutely had been interested in it. I personally was against the death penalty on a moral ground. I just thought that it wasn't right for us to kill other people, whether they were guilty or not. But I didn't have a legislative position on it. I had worked with, again, animal issues, but some of the folks that I worked with on animal issues had also been working to abolish the death penalty. And last summer, I actually went out to breakfast one Sunday morning, sat down, and as I was waiting for my coffee, there was a piece of the Albuquerque Journal sitting there. And I don't often look at the Journal, and I don't look at it very often at all. And I had just finished working for one of our new state senators here in New Mexico, Senator Tim Keller, who had just won a fabulous primary against Shannon Robinson down in Albuquerque. So I was in between contracts, and the one piece of the Albuquerque Journal sitting there was an advertisement for this position. And I read it and I said, wow, that's my resume.
Yes.
And so I said, wow, let me do a little research on this. And so I applied for the job and had 6 whole months to get ready before we had a bill in Santa Fe.
I'm going to throw in a little backstory here about me in this show. Those of you who've been listening to me know that I did radio for 9 years before I came on TV. And the very first, I think it was the very first year, so it was probably 1999, 98, whatever the year was, not important. This was one of the issues that I just said, I made a commitment on the air at that time that we will do shows against the death penalty until the death penalty is repealed. And I did 1 or 2 shows a year for the 9 years I was on the air. Times I got very preachy. I don't know if I helped the cause or hurt the cause. This was just something I really believed in. And, you know, Viki is talking about the fact that we have repealed the death penalty, but there is I wish it was that simple. But there's still a lot of issues, and there's still the possibility of resurrection and this. So we are going to keep doing this until it is dead, buried, solidly, irrevocably.
Absolutely.
Because I agree with you, we don't have the right in God's name or anybody's name to kill somebody. You know, there was that old, I think it was Phil Oakes who did a song. I played it once on the air, on the radio, The Iron Maiden. I don't know if you're familiar with Phil Oakes.
I'm not.
An old folk here. Really old. I'm really old. That's why I know him. But it was back then it was about the electric chair. And he had the line in there that, I forget the exact phrase, but it's about killing people to tell people that killing is wrong.
Exactly. That phrase, why do we kill people who kill people to show people that killing people is wrong?
And I think that really started somewhere, maybe not with him, but that was one of the lines in that song. And so I support this completely. You know, I just, when we kill somebody, we kill us a little piece of ourselves as well. That's not okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's what I say, Reverend, is that this is not about the crime. This is not about the murderer. This is about us as a society and how we react to violence. And again, that's why we work with, ours has been a victim-led movement since the beginning in New Mexico. In fact, it was murder victim family members, of which I am one myself. My stepfather was murdered 20 years ago. And we are the backbone of the movement in New Mexico. We say not in our name. Do not kill in our name. If you kill the person who killed my loved one, that does not bring my loved one back. In fact, all that does is cause more violence and more harm for more people. It does not bring closure to me. And so it's been a victim-led movement in New Mexico since the very beginning. In fact, that's how it started. 4 of our murder victim family members in 1998 went to a interim committee meeting, and Gail Chasey was a brand new legislator then, and they met out in Santa Rosa and said, we want you to look at the death penalty because we want you to see what it does to victims' families. It forces us to go to years and years of trials and appeals and relive this. And Representative Chasey came up to them afterwards and said, you know, I've always been opposed to the death penalty. I never knew what it did to victims' families. And now that I know what it does to victims' families, I am absolutely going to work to abolish this. And she said that day, it's not going to happen overnight, but my grandmother lived to be 100, and we're going to do this.
You know, it was interesting because one of the first shows I forget who even represented. I've had, you know, clergy. I've had people actually from the agency. I've had almost all the shows. This is one of the first shows I've done without somebody from the murder victims' families also present, but you're covering both roles.
Both roles, unfortunately, absolutely.
And one of the women, I think it was my first show when I was doing the radio, and at the end of my radio shows, because of a lot of reasons, I was my own engineer as well as an on-air personality. But early on in the shows, I got to sit in the studio with the guests, and I had an engineer. And I don't want to give out this woman's name. I don't think she's even with us anymore. But it was this sweet little old lady whose family had been murdered. And short of a Tibetan Lama that I once interviewed, I have never met anybody with a more gentle energy than this woman. No animosity, no anger, just almost saint-like. Mm-hmm. And it was like, you know, this, like you said, this is not going to help me. This does not serve anybody, and it sure doesn't serve God.
Well, it doesn't, and it doesn't serve anybody. And what it does do is perpetuate the violence.
Yes.
And it doesn't bring healing for anyone. And if I can spend my time trying to make the world a more peaceful, a more loving place, then that's a much better use of my time than trying to seek vengeance from someone.
I agree. You know, and it's interesting. I mean, in a very biblical sense, and I don't want to get too deep into this, but Bible's real clear. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. And it's not like that God is going to strike somebody down. I believe that's a karmic statement. But at no point does it, you know, it says an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That's also a karmic statement. This is not, Jesus never advocated violence. And, you know, the Catholic Church is, you know, one of your backers. I think most of the churches are.
Most absolutely are. Many of the churches in New Mexico. In fact, our physical agent is the New Mexico Conference of Churches. And they have, the Lutherans, our rabbis, I mean, the Methodists, I could just go on and on, the Quakers, everybody has been really, because of that. And in fact, I have a friend of mine who is a Christian, and she says, well, it's one of the big 10 that God said, thou shalt not kill. It's one of the big 10. So I think for spiritual or religious people who are following any type of religion in our country, none of them agree with executing people.
Yeah, and I think I think it kind of highlights how, I think we have a lot of people talking the talk, but they ain't walking the walk, unfortunately. That
Absolutely.
We are a fake society. I mean, we don't really have a spiritual heart.
We don't, and we've been tuned to seek vengeance, and we've been tuned to seek reparations immediately. Someone does something to me, I must do something back to them.
Yeah.
And we're not a loving, caring society the way we would like to think we are.
Yeah, and the way every religion teaches it. I mean, one of my teachers is a Sufi master, and his basic statement is there are 99 descriptives of Allah in the Quran, and the most important descriptive, the highest descriptive, is mercy.
Oh, that's a beautiful statement.
Yeah.
And that is mercy, because mercy not only shows empathy for the person that you're showing that mercy, it's giving yourself empathy.
Yes.
You're making yourself a better person by showing mercy.
Yeah, I mean, he talked about it being higher than love. We had this whole conversation, and it's on my website, so his name is Molina, and you can look it up under the M. If you get to my website, there's not all, but a bunch of my radio shows are listed there. I don't know if you were around at the time when it happened, but there was a movie, I think it was either Iran or Iraq, and how they deal with the death penalty and the families, and the Coalition to Repeal sponsored it.
Yes.
Wonderful
I was not
movie.
around, but when I was putting together our 12-year history, I did a photography history of the movement with about 350 images. And one of the things I came across was one of the flyers, as well as several newspaper articles about them sponsoring that movie.
They had the movie, they had a discussion afterwards. We did a show with the people who were discussing the movie prior to the movie. It was, I remember it was an interesting, even then we look at those, quote, barbaric countries, and they were much more civilized about how they deal with the death penalty than.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there was only 25 countries in the world last year that did executions, and that, of course, was the United States, Iran, Iraq, China. Those really great ones. We have places that are, since the governor saw this bill last time in 2007, we've had more than 10 countries have abolished the death penalty. Mexico abolished the death penalty. We have countries all over Asia and Africa who are abolishing the death penalty because they want to be part of the European Union, and you can't if you're killing people. They don't allow you into the European Union. And so they want to move forward. This is something that other people find absolutely horrifying. In fact, when George Bush, the young George Bush, was elected for his second term and went overseas for his very first press conference, the first question out of a reporter's mouth was, how on earth can you still have the death penalty in your country? I mean, it's a huge issue for the rest of the world, and they're just shocked when they know that we execute people in this country. And I think that's one of the reasons why we had such support for getting rid of it this year, was realizing what kind of company we were in. Yeah.
Let me back up for a second. Talk about the 12 years that the coalition has been in New Mexico. Is it a national coalition that sets up state branches?
Well, actually, there is a national coalition to abolish the death penalty, and many of us are state affiliates of that, and we definitely work with them. And the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty came about back in the 70s, when all states were required to stop killing people because they were doing it wrong. And we had about 4 years there where there were no death penalties, and then Georgia and some other states came back and showed the Supreme Court they could do it right. And of course, we see where that's gotten us. We have now 135 men who were innocent, who were sentenced to death, who've been exonerated since the late 70s. And so there is a national coalition that we work with and that we work with in many other states. We have states that are working on it. We have 15 states that don't have the death penalty. We're the 15th now, and then we have 35 who do.
Wow. Really?
We're only the second. Yeah, we are. We are the second state to legislatively abolish the death penalty since 1965. It's only been done from New Jersey in 2007. New York has gotten rid of the death penalty through their Supreme Court. Their Supreme Court has said it's unconstitutional.
And is there still I remember, I think it was last year we did a show, there was a moratorium in Illinois?
There is a moratorium in Illinois, but their death row is filling back up again. They're back up to about 15 people on death row.
So they're just sentencing them, they're just not killing them.
Exactly. Well, kind of like in California. I mean, we have hundreds of people on death row in California, and they're not executing anyone, because they've got so many different cases in front of their Supreme Court there.
Oh, good. I hope they overwhelm them.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about it. I mean, I've heard, I don't read the papers much. I find them to be, let's not get there.
Anything but news?
Well, not anything but news, but it's sensationalism most of the time. And there's been talk of repealing the repeal. Is that possible?
Not in the way that Sheriff Darren White wants to do it. And again, I actually have a lot of respect for Sheriff Darren White. I used to work with him a lot when I worked on animal issues. And I can tell you one thing, if I had an abuse case for animals, I hoped it was in Bernalillo County, because he and his officers would be out there within the hour rescuing those animals. So this has been a little different for me to be on an opposite side. He's always been really good on the critters, not so much on this. So once we passed this bill, he decided he was going to repeal the repeal. And our state Supreme Court, our Constitution, does not allow ballot initiatives on public safety issues. And that's what this is, a public safety issue. So the only way that we're going to repeal the repeal is if it's brought back in legislatively.
Is there any chance of that happening?
Not anytime soon. I mean, obviously that's always could happen in the future, but I don't think that it's going to happen anytime soon. We fought a long battle. We have a lot of support, and I always tell people that if they put in a bill to reinstate, they would have to go back and through the same committees that we just won. So I don't see them having the support. I mean, we passed the House with with 42 people with us.
And my understanding is and we talked about this the other day, we don't have a bill that's retroactive, so there are still people on death row who could be executed. There are people who have committed what would be called capital crimes. If they get caught, could be subject to execution. How does that
crazy.
work?
It's absolutely crazy, and it makes those of us who have worked to abolish the death penalty crazy, because it doesn't make any sense. Unfortunately, our Constitution in New Mexico does not allow for bills to be retroactive, so like every other bill, it became effective July 1st. Any bill that's passed in the session will become law usually July 1st of that year. So any crime that was committed before July 1st, as you said, that was a capital case could still face the death penalty. We have 2 gentlemen on death row, and then we have 4 others in the state who are facing the death penalty. And that's what, I say. We have a state who's gotten rid of it. We had our lead counsel with the Attorney General's office, Mr. Steve Suttle, last year say this needs to be done legislatively, and if it's done legislatively, that's the right way to do it. Well, that's what we've done legislatively. And our representatives have all voted for it. The governor, who we all elected, has voted his way on it. So I think it's crazy to think that we're going to execute people in the state. So what we can hope for now is that our current governor or a future governor, because the 2 guys on death row right now are a decade or more away from an execution at this point. So what we can hope is that, and what we will work on, is that our current governor or the future governor commuting those sentences to life without parole.
Do they have to wait till it works its way through the court, or can they just commute it now?
They could commute it now, absolutely.
Has there been any willingness on the governor's part to do that?
Not at all.
How about I mean, I don't want to sit here like my crystal ball, but everything I read says Ms. Denish will be the next governor. Is she committed to that, or she made a statement? Or
she put out a statement the day that Richardson looked at the bill, saying that she supported abolition and she would sign the bill herself if she were governor. So we will wait and see if she becomes our next governor. In fact, she's running against a Republican, Representative Janice Arnold Jones, who also voted for repealing the death penalty. So the two women that are running for governor in the state right now have both said they are for abolition.
Have any of them said they'd be willing to commute sentences?
We haven't asked them that. We think it's a little premature. We just want to see now, and again, believe me though, as soon as whoever gets elected will be hearing from us. But I haven't given up on the current governor either. I know that he has said right now, in fact, he was asked the second that he signed the bill. I was there the minute he put his last signature down, someone from the media asked him about doing that. And I think it was just a little too soon for him.
Well, I mean, how could somebody sign a bill that will selectively remove the death penalty from being, I was going to say executed, which is double, never mind. But I mean, you know, it's, and then sit there and say, well, these other people, it's too bad.
I don't either. And his reasoning is that those particular cases, and I don't think he was looking at the four guys possibly facing the death penalty. He was specifically talking about the two guys on death row now. And he said, you know, they're working their way through the courts. The courts have talked. And, you know, quite frankly, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me either. And I think that that's something that, again, the governor just last year supported the death penalty, and when he was stumping for president, actually wanted to expand the death penalty. And so I think with all the new information we were able to give him to change his mind, that we do stand a shot of continuing to give him that information and keeping that dialogue open for the other 6 folks that are facing it.
You know, in previous shows on the death penalty, we've had conversations where we talked about the various aspects of it, and there were 3 sections of it. One was the purely spiritual aspect, one was the certainty aspect, and the other was the financial aspect.
Right.
I mean, even if you eliminate the first 2, the certainty and the spiritual, I mean, economically, it costs so much more to go through the whole death sentencing, death, you know, all these appeals and everything. And
actually, 80% of your cost in the death penalty case happen before the appeals. It's because you have 2 trials. You have to have a guilt or innocence trial and a death penalty or not trial. You have so much more cost to the courts and the DAs and the public defenders in the initial cases, and as we just talked about earlier, you have your victims' families who are subjected to this for year after year after year. And in fact, the cost issue was very big in this country this year. We had 11, in addition to us, there were 10 other states that had viable abolition bills. It was the penultimate year for abolition in the United States this year. In fact, we look forward to 2011, it will be the same way. But in Kansas, for example, that was the premise of their bill, and the legislator there, who I just met a couple months ago, she pushed this because of the cost aspect. And it's something that we made sure that the governor and all the legislators here heard about. Now, when they talked on the floor or in committee, none of them talked about the cost issue. But we made sure they had the issue. In fact, if you listened to them on the floor of either the House or the Senate this year in New Mexico, you would have thought you were in church. Because that's all they talked about was the moral reasons why. But again, as legislators, they're allowed that. So even if it was the cost that moved them over or the innocence certainty issue, they were able to say, look, I don't believe in taking someone's life.
Which to me is the ideal approach. I'm just thinking about the idea that we have people still sitting there. We have a statement, a public statement that we don't believe in this particular form of punishment. And we have an economy where we're looking to, we're going to be cutting money out of social services, cutting money out of schools, whatever it costs for each of these trials to commute the sentence and say, look, will you spend your time in jail? We'll save X amount of dollars. I could actually pay for 20 more teachers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Another with the cost. Representative Mo Maestas out of Albuquerque, Antonio Maestas, he was formerly a prosecutor in the Bernalillo County DA's office. And he said that he was a prosecutor there for 2 years. And while he was a prosecutor for 2 years, they had their best and brightest 2 DAs working on one death penalty case. So for 2 years, and this case is still going on, but for those 2 years, and he said, if they would not have been working on that death penalty case, those 2 guys could have convicted 400 violent criminals and gotten them off the streets. So the cost to us is huge in public safety and our dollars. And that's one of the problems now, is being able to show New Mexico that we're going to save money by getting rid of the death penalty. Well, we're not, because we still have 6 people facing the death penalty.
Yeah, I would think that in a very materialistic society,
that would get them, if nothing else.
Exactly.
If nothing else, that would get. And it did turn a lot of people this year. It made people. And then, of course, we had the pious response that said, "Oh, you can't put a price on justice," which I, again, love my Representative Gail Chasey, my sponsor. As soon as she heard that on the floor, she stood right up and turned around and said, "What are you talking about? That is our job, to put a price on justice. We do it every single day. When we decide to fund this program or not fund that program, we are putting a price on justice. Don't throw that pious crap at me." Oh, she was fabulous. She said, "Don't even try it," because that's exactly what we do. We put a price on justice every day.
We put a price on human life every day.
Every day. We decide who is worthy or not worthy.
Exactly. I mean, that's a whole other show for another time, but exactly.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
Yeah, that's why in these times, I would think this would just pick up some momentum. You hear, we're talking about cutting, again, the stuff I just talked about, all the social programs.
We're talking about cutting things for our children in this state.
Yeah.
And we know what a plight our children face. I was just at the New Mexico Conference of Churches annual dinner 2 weeks ago, and Marian Wright Edelman, the founder of the Children's Defense Fund, was there. And to listen to her, and that's all I could think of, Reverend, all I could think of was her talking about the plight that our children in New Mexico face, and the teen pregnancy rates, the dropout rates, the drug rates, the gang rates. And I was just blown away. The children that go to bed hungry in our state, and we're going to waste money on something like this?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
I hear you. You're talking about that. I don't want to get too diverted, but that's, Ruth Hoffman.
Yes, she's one of my lobbyists.
Yes, she's fantastic.
She's fabulous. She's with the Lutheran Advocacy. In fact, our office is at their church, and she is one of my
still down in the basement.
lobbyists. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, because I do shows with her during legislative session every year too, just looking at their agendas. What bills are there floating around that are still being worked on, for
our victims? We actually have 2 bills left that we are trying to get passed that will help our murder victim family members. One of them is an employee leave bill, which will, it has, for any employer who has 4 or more employees, they are required to give paid or unpaid time off to their employees if their employee has had to deal with a murder in their family, and they need to either work with the DAs or go to a court proceeding. It really empowers our victims to be a part of the process. I mean, they don't want people to be executed, but they don't want them to be right back out killing somebody else. They want justice served, and if they can have a voice. And our other bill is a money bill, which is probably not going to go anywhere this year, but we will not let it go. In fact, I'm afraid to find money for my money bill, because I'm afraid Senator John Arthur Smith is just going to take it and say, "Thank you very much. I'm going to use this for some current projects." So I'm holding off on finding that. But we really want to expand the services for our murder victim family members. For the children who've lost a parent to murder, we'd like to be able to give them $10,000 so they can go to college. We would like to be able to give them counseling services. We work with the Crime Victims Reparation Commission here, and they'll flat out tell you that murder victim family members do not get the services they need in this state. All of our money is going to other victims, and these victims do not get the counseling they need. They don't get the help they need. And in talking to these people after they've had a murder happen, and they've lost, I spoke with this one woman whose husband was murdered, and She said, you know, the cameras and the TV and the police were there, and 2 days later, all that was gone. But here I was left wondering, how am I going to pay rent this month, and how am I going to feed my kids next week? Because I don't speak English, and I've never had a job. I've always taken care of the house. And, you know, these are real things that these people face after a murder happens, and we need to be able to step in and help them out.
Well, this goes back to what we just said, you know, putting a price on human life.
Absolutely,
and
and
all
that's
its
the
aspects
price.
of it.
And that is where, why not spend our money on the victims? And that's what we say over and over, putting victims' families first. When you hear about murders that happen, you always hear about the murderer's name. Everybody knows the murderer's name. Nobody ever knows the victim's name. And we want to return it to the victims.
I need to just break in here. We do a couple of PSAs periodically.
Absolutely.
So I got to do a PSA. And this is handwritten, so please bear with me. The Independent Catholic Church of Antioch is holding 2 inquiries classes, inviting the public to ask questions and receive information about an alternative Catholic church. A lot of you may not even know that there's something other than Roman Catholic, and there's quite a number of them. But here in Santa Fe, there is an Independent Catholic Church of Antioch, and it's a very interesting approach to Catholicism. So these are taking place on Saturday, October 10th at 10 a.m. and on Monday, October 12th at 7 p.m. Both classes will be held at 111 West Cordova Road. They are free, and if you have any questions, call 988-4244 and ask for Archbishop Gundry. So that's Saturday, October 10th at 4 p.m. Saturday, October 10th at 10 a.m. and Monday, October 12th at 7 p.m. 111 West Cordova Road. You can just show up. You don't have to call, but if you want, 988-4244, and Archbishop Gundry, work on your penmanship. Okay, I want to come back and let's explore this a little bit further. Can you give us a ballpark figure on what we would save by just taking the death penalty and saying it's gone? How much money would the state save per case?
Oh, I would love to be able to give you that figure. Unfortunately, I can't get that information. The death penalty cases, the money spent on the death penalty is not a line item on anybody's budget. It's withdrawn into the Attorney General's office, the Public Defender's office, the DAs, the courts, the local court houses. So there's so many different ways that we are wasting money by keeping this machine in there. One of the best studies was done out of Duke University a few years ago, and it really shows that you're spending at least $2 million more per case than you would if you were just going for. And again, in California, they say that they can literally in the next 5 years save $1 billion if they would put everybody in life without parole and get rid of the death penalty. What we were able to do in New Mexico.
So it's that much cheaper to house them, feed them, take care of their health, and everything that goes along with it than it is to. They could live to be 60, 70 years old, and it's easier and cheaper to do that.
Absolutely.
Than it is to kill them when they're 30.
Absolutely.
I hope that bothers somebody that's watching this show.
And that's one thing that people, find a hard time, and that's why I encourage people to, do a Google on Duke University death penalty study. Maryland just did a great one that they did a study commission out of their legislature that shows some of these figures. And it's just astounding the amount of money that you're using on all of these appeals and on the bifurcation process in the beginning. So we are wasting way too much money on this when we could, again, have a trial. And the problem in New Mexico is we've yet, since 1979, when we reinstated the death penalty, we've yet to have one case withstand appeals. So what we have in New Mexico is what we call the worst of the worst. We try for the death penalty and waste all that money and end up with life anyway.
Except for the one guy who says, kill me, and they do it, which asking to be killed to me is a sign of insanity, and how they can allow that to happen is...
And it's wrong for us to... And that's what happens many, many times on death row across this country.
We just wear people down.
We wear people down. and they would rather die than spend the rest of their lives in that jail cell. Which is, again, why we made the argument that life without the possibility of parole is, if you've got somebody that follows in and it's a capital case, and in New Mexico we have a pretty narrow statute. There's only 7 aggravators. We have other states that have dozens of aggravators that would get the death penalty. I mean, in fact, in Texas, you don't even have to pull the trigger to get the death penalty. They have what they call law of parties, where you can just be present and get the death penalty, even though you were not the killer. So we are, if you want to be lucky in the death penalty, we have been that way in New Mexico because it's a very narrow statute. We've only had 211 cases that DAs have tried to go after the death penalty in this state from 79 to 07. They tried it 211 times and it worked none.
Wow.
And again, that's a waste of resources.
Yeah, exactly what you said.
And that's not even hitting the appeals process.
And it's not, like you said, those people were doing the job. Instead of doing the death penalty, they'd be
actually keeping the public safer.
Yeah.
They would be able to go after these. And that's one of the things that, because people say, well, if you get rid of the death penalty, you're not going to fire these people in the DA's office. Well, no, but we'll have a safer community because they'll be able to go after real crimes.
Yeah. Instead of having crimes that are basically commuted because we couldn't take care of them in the time allotted.
Absolutely.
Fascinating, isn't it? Scary, isn't it? And I'm talking to you, the audience. We're going to give you some time at the end to give them contact information. Whether you find it scary because of its illogic, whether you find it scary because of the spiritual aspects that underpin this travesty, get involved. Okay, let's talk about the exonerees.
Absolutely. We have 135 exonerees in this country who've been released from death row. They were people who were sentenced to death, and later it came out that they were innocent and they've been freed.
How many people do we know who have actually been executed and then later found out were innocent?
Well, actually, about 100 years ago, there were 2 cases where we executed people, and not only did we find out that they didn't do it, but the victims were still alive. So that's pretty bad. And we have, in fact, the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty has a report out about 4 people that there's overwhelming evidence that they were innocent and executed. And in fact, just recently, in the last month, there has been what we're calling our Shouting from the Rooftops campaign, because Todd Willingham in Texas was an innocent man who was executed. And it's now been proven that not only did he not kill his children like he was accused of, but the arson that he was accused of happened because of an electrical fire. So this man protested and claimed his innocence until the day they killed him in Texas. I believe they killed him in 2004. And our Supreme Court Justice, Anthony Scalia, several years ago said, we have never executed an innocent man in this country, because if we had executed an innocent man, you people would be shouting from the rooftops. Well, I challenge all of your viewers to go to any abolition organization right now, and you will see a banner across the top saying, we're shouting from the rooftops because we know we have executed an innocent man in Texas.
There was, I forget the name of the song. There was another Phil Oakes song, and it was about that exact topic. I played it on one of the shows. I used to take a little musical interlude in the middle of the show, and we'd play some of these songs, and it was about the execution of an innocent man. It was separate from the Iron Maiden song. And it was a famous case, and I can't remember the guy's name.
Well, it could have been, there's several of them that have come up, and Ruben Cantu and Carlos de Luna, and there are several others that,
This is back in the 60s. The song was written, so it had been prior to that. So I still remember.
But again, with when we now have 135, and that's 5 more. When Governor Richardson signed this bill on March 18th, there were 130. We've had 5 since March 18th that have been exonerated, and we have a few more that will be exonerated in the next few months. And so what we're doing in New Mexico, we have partnered with an organization throughout our campaign called Witness to Innocence. And Witness to Innocence is an organization run by death row exonerees. and they educate on the death penalty. They talk to schools, they talk to churches, they meet with legislators, and they were very helpful in our campaign here in New Mexico. Because when you meet somebody who spent 18, 20 years on death row for something they didn't do, you realize how flawed the system is.
A couple of questions. When they get exonerated, is there any criminal charges brought against the people who push through the conviction?
Oh, don't we wish there was? No, we absolutely do. Because what we think is that those folks, if they currently still have a death penalty in their state, should probably be facing the death penalty, because that's premeditated murder to try to railroad someone onto death row. And that's exactly what happens in this country. And when they are exonerated, no, we don't get to go after those people. And in fact, in most cases, there's no compensation for these exonerees. Many of them are fighting to either, they have to get a pardon from the governor, because what happens in so many of these cases, Reverend, is the DAs will say, we have chosen not to refile this charge. Now, they won't say they're innocent. They won't say they're innocent, so they prevent them from getting any restitution. They prevent them from getting a pardon. They prevent them from getting a job. They prevent them from so many things, and that's become a huge issue around this country. And in fact, it's happening in many cases where, some exonerees do get compensated, but
how do you get
don't.
Exonerated without being found innocent?
Because they say that something happened in one of their original trials that wasn't right, so they need a new trial, but then the DA will hang on to it for another good 120, 160 days, and then come back and say, we don't have enough evidence to go forward, but this is an open investigation, and we're still looking at you for this. Oh, it's absolutely insane what we have done to these people. These are innocent people whose lives have been completely ruined.
So you've got 135. What percentage of that is that of the actual
people we're killing?
Or waiting to be killed, yeah.
We have about 3,000 on death row, a little over 3,000 on death row right now. When we look at the numbers of, for every 9 people that we've executed, we've now exonerated 1. And again, those are the lucky ones. That's what I tell people. The people who are exonerated, they're the lucky ones. They're the ones who had family that didn't give up on them. They're the ones who had attorneys or the Innocence Project or the great students in Chicago. They're the lucky ones. They're the ones who had somebody listening to them. Because as you can imagine, on death row, everybody says they're innocent.
Yeah.
So these were actual lucky people. And I think that, again, these are things that are overturned over and over again. These convictions are overturned on appeals, and usually when it hits to the federal Supreme Court level is when there can be any kind of relief in these cases.
Let's talk about the societal prejudice of death penalty. Used to be, I don't know if it's the case anymore, that the people who are on death row are predominantly male of color.
Absolutely.
And poor.
Absolutely.
So that hasn't changed.
That has not changed. And in fact, what's even more disturbing is the race of the victim. In murders, if your victim is white, you are 9 times more likely to get the death penalty than if the victim is a person of color. So what does that say? Does that say that 9 times we value white life 9 times more? The other thing that I don't think many people know is that only 2% or less of murders in this country even qualify as a capital case. So only 2% or less even qualify as a capital case. So what are we saying to the other 99%? What are we saying to those when we talk about, we need the death penalty for the victims, we need to get restitution, we need to get revenge, we need to have justice. Well, what are we, if that's justice, then what are we saying to the other 98%?
So what you're saying is the 7 or 9 aggravating factors will limit who we're going to put up for the death penalty, where another state who has the 235,
right,
they'll put anybody
It's completely arbitrary.
Yeah.
It is completely, it's like when we talk about Texas in this country. Everybody, Texas, they've got an express lane for their death row. But there's like 260 counties or something in Texas. Most of these death penalty cases are coming out of like 10 counties or less. So when we look at Texas, it's not even all of Texas. It's certain pockets of Texas. And again,
so
one of
it's the
those,
collective consciousness of those particular areas.
It's the collect. And again, we've had so many problems coming out of that. Harris County near Houston has been, our biggest one with death cases. Well, there have been so much corruption coming out of that prosecutor's office now that it's laughable that they were, that they're not going to be getting rid of sentences left and right now. And again, it's very arbitrary. The South, and look at our country, the South has the most executions. Texas, Virginia, that's where we're killing people. Now, what about Florida? What about, do we have people that are so much more horrible in the South? Or you want to look at, we talk about deterrence. People say it's a deterrence. That's one of the things that many police officers who support the death penalty have said it's a deterrence. Well, if it's a deterrence, then why do we have more murders in states that have the death penalty per capita than states that don't have the death penalty? Or let's talk about let's talk about Terry Clark, who was our one execution in New Mexico, the first one since 1961. Okay, he was executed in November of 2001. Now, if it was a deterrence, you would think that in 2002 we would have less murders than in 2001. That's what a deterrence does. Instead, in 2001 we had 99, in 2002 we had 152. We had a 54% increase. So it's not a deterrence.
No, none of these things are logical. None of these things. I mean, it's a very emotional thing. And
it's very emotional.
It's not spiritual, and emotions override any intellect or any of this other stuff. It's pathetic almost. We're going to start to run down on time.
Okay.
But you've got this thing coming up, Witness to Innocence fundraiser.
Yes, on this Saturday here in Santa Fe at one of our members' private homes, we are having a fundraiser for Witness to Innocence, and we will have 3 of the 135 exonerees in this country there.
So Saturday is
October 10th, and it's from 4 to 6, and I know we've been flashing up my phone number, which is 205-3750. I just encourage anybody who's interested in coming to give me a call, and I'll give you directions and information on it. And we'll have Juan Melendez, who is an exoneree that lives here in New Mexico. We're going to have Ray Crone there. He's the 100th exoneree, and he was exonerated in Arizona. And we're also going to have Ron Kiney, who was exonerated here in New Mexico. We have 4 death row exonerees from New Mexico that were accused of a murder back in the 70s. The other 3 have passed away, and Ron is our last living exoneree, and he'll fly in from Michigan for the event on Saturday.
And the purpose of the event?
The purpose of the event is to raise money for Witness to Innocence. This is, again, an organization working with death row exonerees, and they were crucial to us passing this bill in New Mexico. Their voice and their message moved legislators and moved Governor Richardson in a huge way. And this is our way of being able to help other states out and being able to help them out.
Well, you were talking about some of the impact of murder victims' families, and we started touching on the lack of any compensation. But I mean, you get somebody who's sitting on death row for who knows how long, and you turn them loose into society. You're right, they don't have, if they still have their charges,
right,
then they can't vote, they can't, there's jobs they can't hold.
And you try 20 years on death row and going and filling out an application, where have you been for 20 years? If you don't have a pardon or something to show I was falsely accused, then who's going to believe you when you say?
Well, hopefully somebody would. And the other part they need is counseling.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things, one of the reasons we're having the fundraiser is to raise those types of money. Because again, they get money from foundations like any other nonprofit, and they write their grants and all that good stuff. But to have that money going straight to counseling, straight to helping them out, straight to giving them a speaking fee in case they come and talk to a church, it'd be nice to be able to give them some compensation for that. And again, these are guys that have spent their lives now working to get rid of the death penalty around the country. And that's one of the things, all 3 of these guys were in numerous states this year. They didn't just help out in New Mexico. They were in Montana and Maryland and Connecticut and Kansas and Nevada, and I mean, they were all over, Nebraska. And so I think that it's a very important voice, and they were such a great partner to us, which is why we wanted to not only have a fundraiser for them, but have it during the balloon fiesta so they could see a couple of balloons.
So people want to attend, they can contact that number.
Just give me a call or send me an email, or they've also got our website up, which you can contact me through there, nmrepeal.org, and just give me a call. I'll be more than happy to get them in.
And if they don't want to attend but they want to donate, they can still just contact you at that number.
Absolutely. Contact me at that number, and I will give you an address so you can write a check to them. It's completely tax donations, and they're a 501c3, so it's a great organization to support.
And if they want to get involved, contact you at that number.
Contact me at that number. We'd love to have you involved. We've got quite a few events coming up where we're going to have tables out and really letting the folks in New Mexico know about our next steps in getting our victims' bills passed and truly putting victims' families first.
So on a bigger picture, people want to get involved not only just with you, they want to contact their local representatives. Do you have a sample letter they should use?
Absolutely. I've got anything that they need. If they want to contact their legislator, they can first call me and find out how their legislator voted on the issue. Their state legislators, whether it's their representative or their senator, and if they want to talk about federal legislation, I absolutely be happy to talk to them about that.
So any form of involvement that they want,
give me a buzz.
Just give you a buzz.
Give me a buzz, or shoot me an email if you prefer that.
And you'll guide them as to what they need.
Absolutely, I will hook them up. And I say even if they've got friends or family who live in other states that are interested in working on the death penalty there because they may still have it, give me a call. I'd love to hook you up with that state affiliate.
Wonderful. So the number's going to be flashing on the screen. It's been flashing on the screen. I give you permission to run away from the TV set for a short period of time, get a pencil and get a paper.
Jot that down.
Yes, you got to get involved. If this doesn't move you, what will move you? You got to get involved. See, I told you I can get preachy.
You can. I like that. I like that. I need a little preachiness every now and then.
I have some difficulties with it. I got to make a couple of announcements. We'll get to a parting thought, and then we'll put a little wrap on this. Every show, I invite you to contact me. At the end of the show, there will be scrolling information, email, phone number, website. Any questions for me, for my guests, you want to put them to me, I'll be happy to forward them. Also, I do counseling. I do spiritual counseling. I do not believe in even though I hold a state license, and if I say it on the other, they may yank it, but I don't believe in the therapeutic model. I don't believe it works. It doesn't account for spirit, which I believe is our most important and valuable and strongest asset. We cannot solve our problems with the same instruments that are creating them, which is our best thinking and our best feelings. So I use spirituality as a means of healing, and I do spiritual counseling. I do not charge for my services. I work on a donation basis. If you think that I could be of any help to you, if you're at all interested in what the process is like, contact me. I'd be happy to talk to you, have you come into the office. We can sit and talk. Again, there's no fees, so you're not obligated for anything. Next week, we're going to have a fascinating show. That this isn't fascinating, but we try to get it diverse. So next week, I'm going to have the Venerable Connie or Constance Miller. She is a Tibetan Buddhist nun, and we're going to not only talk about her path in Tibetan Buddhism, we are actually going to talk about, give instruction, and demonstrate meditation, basic beginner's meditation. So if you're at all interested in meditating, you just started, you're having difficulty, tune us in next week. It's going to be a wonderful show. I am even going to be part of the demonstration. I'm going to get up from behind this desk. So you get to see the bottom half of me and not just the top half. What more could you possibly want?
You got to tune in for that.
Exactly. The only other thing that could possibly be more important than that was if I took off my bandana, which will never happen.
Getting a little crazy on that one, huh?
I got a quick story I'll tell you. I was working in a treatment center, and There was a female client who came to me one day and said, "Is it true people tell me you wear a bandana because you have some kind of strange tattoo on your forehead?" And I said, "You know what? If you graduate this program, I'll show you what's underneath my bandana." She stood to the end. She graduated. We went into my office, pulled the shade for a second, took off my bandana. I showed her there was nothing underneath there.
There was no tattoo
No
hidden.
tattoo, nothing. Anyway, enough for stories. You got a parting thought for us?
I do. I just would really, as you just told your viewers, I would encourage them to get involved. This is an issue that is near and dear to so many hearts, and this truly makes us a better state. And that's what the Repeal Coalition is going to be doing for the next few years, is showing the world that New Mexico is better off without the death penalty.
You know, I mean, we talk a lot about this. We got a couple minutes. Don't have to have a closing thought. I could run through that. Talk about a little bit more about what goes on to the victims' families. I mean, they go through this lengthy process.
They go through this lengthy process, and they have to listen to it over and over and over again.
So they keep getting re-traumatized.
Re-traumatized.
And re-traumatized.
Over and over again. And they also see the media focusing on the person who killed their loved one and never focusing on their loved one. Never talking about, I mean, we rarely have those stories where people really focus on the victim. And if they focus on the victim, it's because the victim was either famous or somebody knew him or something. But never is it like that. And so they would much rather have a trial, put this guy in prison, and then move on with their lives. Try to start healing. There is no closure when another person is executed.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally, and the whole process, you know, if you, the watching audience, I'm not sure what the proper vernacular is for this, I'm still working on that. If you had a cut on your arm and you kept picking on it, it would keep bleeding, it would not heal properly. Eventually, it might heal, and you'd have a scar. I mean, yeah.
That's a great analogy. That really is. That's exactly the way they have described it.
Somebody suffers the trauma of having a close loved one murdered, and then they have to go back and relive it, and that scab keeps getting picked at, and it keeps bleeding, and it keeps getting picked at, and it keeps bleeding. And then at the end, it's finally over with, and all you're left with is that scar. You know, PTSD, trauma, whatever clinical term you want to use.
And that's exactly what they're
devastating.
that's what they're going through.
Yes.
That is what they're going through. And then if you end up, and then, you know, at the same time, you also have the murderer's family going through this. And however you may feel about the person who committed a murder, what about his grandmother and his mother and his father and his kids and everybody else?
Is there any movement out there to help them and get them monies and support and counseling?
Oh, yeah, there are lots of different smaller groups that work with them.
Good. I mean, yeah, you know, we got about, my clock is accurate, about a minute. I hope you're getting the idea of the magnitude of the damage that we are causing by pursuing this ungodly path, you know.
And that's what it is. It's absolutely following something that's not going to give you the results that you want. It's going to cost too much. It's going to re-traumatize your victims. And it's not fair. It's not just. It's arbitrary. It depends on what color you are, what color your victim is, where you live. I mean, that's what I say. Are the people in Texas so much worse than we are? I mean, we've had one exit. Yeah, that may not be a good one. That may not be a good one.
To all you Texans listening, please come back.
We're just teasing. But again, it's just, it doesn't work. And, you know, again, we are re-traumatizing our victims' families, and we would much rather put that focus on them.
Viki, I thank you so much.
Thank you, Reverend. I appreciate it.
I make the same commitment to you I've made to your predecessors. This show is available to you until this thing is dead, buried, and no way of being revived.
I appreciate that, and we thank you for the invitation.
Oh, this is a reflection of our society. We talked about that too, but you know, I will not be content until we don't have to do this show anymore. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Blessings
very much.
to you for the great work you do.
Thank you.
Thank you all for tuning in. Tune in next week. We'll be looking at Tibetan Buddhism and meditation. Until then, know that you are one with the divine. Demonstrate it. Show it. Find it in your heart. Be merciful. Thank you. Blessings. I'm Reverend Phil, and I've been your host for Words of the Prophets. Thank you for tuning in. Please join me again next week, same time, same channel, for more Words of the Prophets.